So here we are in Silicon Valley, and the programs that we really focus on here at Santa Clara University resonate with what Silicon Valley is all about. Entrepreneurship, you heard about the Global Social Benefit Incubator. We also have a Frugal Innovation Program in concert with our School of Engineering here, whose tagline is Engineering with a Mission, and you'll be hearing from one of the leaders there in a moment. And Social Capital, how do we get the right capital to accelerate the right business models and technology solutions to affect change both in the developing world and, as Tim said, here in Silicon Valley. And you'll hear from John Kohler this afternoon. So what I'd like to do now is turn our program over to our moderator for the day, Robert Mittman. Robert brings decades of experience in forecasting, consulting, and facilitating to bear on topics ranging from healthcare to emerging technology. So he's eminently qualified to moderate today, and I think you'll see from his interactions with the panelists that he is both compelling and provocative, as well as extremely engaging. I have had the privilege of working with Robert in my former life in the private sector, and we're delighted to have you here today. So Robert, I'd like to invite you to the stage. And would you like the panelists to come at this time too?
Yeah, let me invite the panelists.
Please join me in welcoming our first panel.
Any order. Delighted to see you, Ronni. Yeah, panel, if I could invite you to switch on your mics. Well, Thane, thank you for that introduction. It's one that I think my mom would love, and that I'm going to have a challenge to live up to today. So I hope that I do both you and my mom justice here. Thank you. So the panel that we have here, the conversation that we're about to have, is entitled "Secrets of Success: Stories from the Trenches of Social Entrepreneurship," and I'm counting on the panelists here to uncover their secrets. What we have here is a collection of successful individuals, people who in careers in the media, high technology, medicine and public health, and education have found a calling to make the lives of more people better, and that trajectory, that career path brought them to becoming social entrepreneurs, to creating these kinds of enterprises for social benefit. What we want to hear from them basically is what works, what's successful, and if they're willing to be frank about it, also what doesn't work, what hasn't worked, and the learnings that they've had from those parts of their career path that haven't worked out so well. And then also about how they think about the impacts of what they do. So that's the main topics for the conversation. So who we have here, starting on your far left, is Ronni Goldfarb. Ronni is the founder, the president, and the CEO of Equal Access. Equal Access is an international nonprofit that provides information and education about healthcare and about social issues through radio in developing countries. Today, Equal Access has a broadcast reach of more than 100 million underserved people in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. So please join me in welcoming Ronni. Next to Ronni is Lisa Jobson. Lisa is the Assistant Director of IEARN-USA. She began her career as a high school history teacher before joining IEARN. And IEARN it's the International Education and Resource Network. International Education and Resource Network. What it does is it empowers teachers and young people in their classrooms to work together every day online using the internet and other new communications technology. So they have projects going between classrooms that are distributed globally. And every day, over 2 million students are engaged in collaborative project work across the world. Join me in welcoming Lisa. To Lisa's left is Joel Salonikio. Joel is the CEO and co-founder of Datadyne. Joel is a practicing pediatrician. He's a former Wall Street computer consultant, a former epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and he's got a passion for combining technology and public health to address inequities in developing countries. He leads Datadyne.org's efforts to develop and promote new technologies for health and international development, and including the flagship project, and it's an award-winning product, is EpiSurveyor, which is a mobile data collection project about which Joel will tell you more. Please join me in welcoming Joel. And then between Joel and me is somebody who, if you're one of the locals, is you'll be well acquainted with, is Radha Basu. Radha is the executive director of Anudip, and Radha is trained as an engineer. I'm trained as an engineer too, so we've got that in common, although Radha actually practiced engineering, unlike me. And Radha rose through the ranks at Hewlett-Packard, ultimately becoming the chairman and CEO of SupportSoft, a division of HP. In 2006, Radha and her husband launched Anudip, which is a social enterprise in India that has the mission of generating livelihood opportunities for unemployed and marginalized poor people through training in information technology, and then connecting those people with that training to livelihood sustaining work. I've given just please join me in welcoming Radha as well. So I've given just the briefest of introductions to each of the panelists. What I'd like to ask each of you to do is to introduce yourself further, maybe say more about your work, and then just as a start into the conversation, I'm really interested in how your previous experience in your professional career, because each of you has had a professional career before and outside of becoming a social entrepreneur, how that previous experience contributed or didn't contribute to your success as a social entrepreneur. And Radha, I'll begin with you.
Thank you. I would first say that
you're not hearing amplification? Can you make sure you're on? Let's see, it's okay.
Hello?
Yeah, now you're on.
Yes? Can you hear me? So I would start by saying that you hear the term social entrepreneur a lot, which connotes an individual. And as we were introduced, talking about the individuals here. But I think when I think of myself currently in what I'm doing, I think of myself as being part of a team in a social enterprise that enables people. They're not our beneficiaries. We don't give things to them. We enable, we're catalysts in enabling people to bring different services and to better themselves economically with water, with health, whatever those sets of things. So at the core of what we do are the people that we work with. They are indeed the people creating the change. And I was at the Skull World Forum as well, and something that Archbishop Desmond Tutu said will always stay with me. He said, we're all here just to be able to make it possible for other people to bring joy, happiness, and economic worth to their lives. So that's the first thing that I would say, just to sort of, we talk so much about entrepreneurship, but it is about the team, the enterprise, our partners that we work with, other NGOs, even just discussing before we got on stage here of the way we can partner. So having said that, my background, as was shared earlier, is 30 years in the corporate area. I'm an engineer, I'm a technologist, I'm an entrepreneur, both within Hewlett-Packard for 20 years and then starting a software company, taking it public. So really kind of what you see in Silicon Valley, though I had the opportunity to do it worldwide. I ran HP's Global Enterprise Solutions Organization and also had a really, I think, rare, and this can only happen at that wonderful place called Hewlett-Packard, a rare opportunity to start Hewlett-Packard in India in 1987 and start the first software center in Bangalore of any multinational when people never believed that you could do software in India. Just like many times today we hear at Anudip that you would do IT with rural people, with minority Muslim women. Oh my gosh, that could never be a sustainable business. That can never happen. Do they have power? Can you actually go there? Do you have to walk there? And at one of the conferences last year, I put up all of these questions, and I happened to keep from 1987 a set of questions that was asked when we at Hewlett-Packard opened the first software center in Bangalore. And if you put those two up, 1987, 2010, the questions were not that different. The disbeliefs were not that different. And what I would like to say is all of this is possible. The IT business in India is a $70 billion business. It's transformed the country, but in the metros. It's transformed, there's a burgeoning middle class, but it is not touching and bringing that economic empowerment and wealth creation into the broader population of rural, marginalized, and minority, particularly unemployed youth and women. And that leads to insurgency, and that is the role that we hope to play to create livelihoods there.
Thank you, Radha. I'm going to jump around. Lisa, let me ask you to speak next.
Sure. Radha, I love opening with that notion of collaboration and leadership. I work in education, and I think we do a huge disservice to young people when we give them the impression that leadership is something exceptional and that innovative ideas come from exceptional people, because we all know that they come from the kinds of collaborations that make it possible. And I don't tell a founder's story. I'm not someone who started IEARN, but I think I tell a story of a network and a community, and I think that that story has some relevance when we think of leadership and the power of partnership. We're a global network of teachers and students all over the world that are using technology to design and collaborate on projects together. And they're projects that are curriculum-based with an educational purpose, but also with a goal of getting young people engaged in real-world issues. And as I come at this as a classroom teacher, and I think what we all know is that when you get kids working cross-culturally, when you give them an opportunity to work on something they believe in and care about, when you give them leadership opportunities, when you expose them to multiple perspectives, that not only do they learn better, but they become adults who take it for granted that the way you deal with the world's problems is that you collaborate, and that as part of their education they've had the ability to develop all the competencies and skills that come with that and allow them to tackle the huge scale challenges that we know the world is facing. So I think that's just a nice way to frame the conversation. It's one that resonates very much with us, both in terms of how IEARN classrooms work, but also how we work as a global network. We started back in '88 as a pilot between 12 schools in Moscow, 12 schools in New York State, and it started by a businessman who had been a high school principal. He also was concerned about the challenges that were facing the world and that his students were going to inherit, and he also was recognizing the successes that he was having in his own school, getting kids engaged in authentic tasks and getting them engaged in the community outside the school walls. And so he was around in '88 when email was starting to become available to schools in the education context, and so he brought some people together and said, let's do this globally, and in fact, let's do it in a context of two countries whose governments are not able to collaborate, and show that citizens themselves, starting from the youngest of ages, can actually engage with each other and tackle some of these problems. So they built that model up over several years. I think one other, just follow up to the notion of leadership or sort of founder story, he made a big emphasis early on to make sure that the network wasn't sort of an American program that had international reach, that it was really the global network. And so he sought out people first in 9 countries who shared the kind of vision he had of that kind of learning and giving kids that kind of opportunity. And back then it might have been people who were interested in student-centered learning, people who were interested in bringing technology into the classroom and project-based learning. But those initial countries were part of writing the IEARN Constitution, were part of developing the performance standards that countries that came after them would be held to, the program design. And so it really, our story is of this global movement of very localized leadership. And that's, for us too, that's the only way to provide support. And, you know, we know sitting in our office, I work with IEARN-USA, or IEARN Mongolia, now IEARN Uganda, IEARN South Africa. We can't decide what an implementation strategy, a successful one, would look like in Pakistan. So we have a team there that's, you know, runs that program independently. So that I think, for me, in thinking about bringing kids into today's workforce too, we know that work environments are becoming increasingly complex, and so it's our belief that we can't keep graduating young people who don't have the ability to work in distributed teams on, you know, coordinated actions towards common goals, and that's our goal in IEARN. So I think that's sort of a social benefit model, but from the youngest of ages up.
Thank you. Ronni?
So I wanted to expand a little bit on the description of equal access, because you were right that we do a lot of work with innovative radio programming, because we're really targeting the people living on $1 and $2 a day. What you were talking about, Radha, people that don't have internet connections, although now most of them have mobile phones. So we're basically doing radio programming with mobile interactivity, SMS and IVR, so that we have an interactive dialogue going. We also use TV and street theater and a number of different forms of media. And then the other part of it is that we combine that media outreach with what we call direct community engagement. So that means if we're doing a program for young people on life skills and livelihoods training, for example, 8 million youth listen every week in Nepal to that program, but they also meet in clubs and discuss it and take actions. So we have a ground component, whether it's listening groups or town hall forums, and believe that those two things really work together, because part of it is providing information and new opportunities, and the other part is the social cohesion of getting support or meeting with others and creating something new. So basically we concentrate on both the media programming and the direct engagement activities or mobilization. And for me, just going back to the beginnings of the 2 threads of my career, it brought, you know, I started out as a non-formal education instructor doing life skills for youth in the public school system. So I really got to understand the power of the group and the power of being able to be outside of the pressure and talk about solving problems. And then later I went into 15 years of corporate media and started working with the UN. So the combination of the power and broad reach of media with the intimacy of the support of a group and the ability for people to support one another and believe in one another is the combination of equal access. And I also feel that I wanted to echo what was very refreshing to hear, because I think of equal access as being created even though I was at the center of the founding. It's only alive and growing because everyone owns that vision and is adding to that vision every day, meaning all our staff in different countries, and also the people that we work with, the people that are listening to our programs, that are meeting, because if you picture this, these are the countries: Afghanistan, Nepal, Cambodia, Pakistan, Yemen, Chad, Niger, and some project activities in Laos and Indonesia. So our offices have radio studios and outreach, but they're all nationals of those countries that are producing the programming. And then the whole way that we produce it is not top-down anyway, even from there, where we have the microphone out in the village, and people are either SMSing or saying how they're participating, how they're creating things. So we're creating national dialogues on women's empowerment, human rights, civil society, and youth life skills, and entertaining shows, not just giving people information, youth chat shows, serial dramas. But I do think that the authentic piece of believing in human potential as one of the threads of solving things is really at the crux of equal access, and we're just trying to use media to make it wide and reach millions of people.
Good, thank you. Joel?
Well, I also want to just get back to one of the things that you had mentioned earlier, which was about people telling you how impossible it was to set up something in Bangalore. I think anybody who is working in social entrepreneurship is probably used to the concept that you can never let those of you telling you that something's impossible stand in the way of those of you who are actually doing it, since, of course, it's all impossible right up until the moment when it happens. Right?
Right.
And I think, in fact, I've worked for years now, for decades in Africa, particularly in East Africa, and I think we're poised on the edge in East Africa of a Bangalore moment as well, of a confluence of technology and bandwidth and more affluent population, the mobile phone, et cetera, things that it's really poised to change in a dramatic way. I think my own work, or the work that we do at Datadyne, is kind of touching on that a little bit, in the sense that I've been out in California a few times in the past couple of years. One of them was actually, we were very happy to receive one of the Tech Laureate awards a few years back, but also the Wall Street Journal Technology Innovation Award for Healthcare, won the previous year by Raytheon. I'm not sure how many people Raytheon have. With Datadyne, we have 12. But it was the first time, and I really think this is kind of a milestone, not in the sense of us being proud of it, which we are, but it's the first time that software programmed entirely by Africans in Africa won the Wall Street Journal Technology Innovation Award. This is not expat staff in Africa or anything like that. These are Kenyans educated in Kenya, in Nairobi, in an office, developing software that is now, because it's web-based, used all around the world. In terms of kind of the lessons or my own particular background and how it's influenced, I spent a lot of time. I've been working in public health for about a quarter century, and mostly in Southeast Asia and in Africa. And before that, I was actually a computer consultant. In the 80s, I worked on Wall Street as a computer consultant. For a long time, I realized that my position as both a clinician, as a pediatrician, as a public health doctor, and as a technologist, that particular combination of things was really very helpful in developing software for the purpose of health, or public health, in developing countries. So it's interesting. On the one hand, you've got that kind of a series of expertises coming together in the same person or the same organization, how useful that can be. More recently, though, I've begun to realize that it seems to me begun to shift in the other direction. And I can't quite figure out how to resolve this. And what I mean is that with our software, the main software which you had referred to called EpiSurveyor, which is used to collect form-based data on mobile phones. And the idea is to make this something where it's as easy to use as a Gmail. You go to a website, log in, you don't have to talk to us, you don't have to meet with us, we don't have to fly out to your country. It's just there, it's waiting for you to use it. It doesn't cost anything for 99% of the users. What we found is, although we envisioned that for the purpose of health, and making it for the purpose of health, I think my experience was very useful for, people are now using it for all sorts of things that have nothing to do with health. And so on the one hand I have, and again I'm not sure how to square this, on the one hand I have that my particular experiences seemed to be very useful to me in coming up with useful technology for the purpose of health. But it is when I have actually made the software the most general, meaning really the least reflective of my own individual background. The more that I have taken my own thoughts and my opinion and my control away from the use of the software, actually the more useful the software has become. So it's interesting. I mean, again, you look at the background, and if you talked to me 5 years ago, I would have said the key element to our success was this combination of backgrounds and particular expertise. And now I would say, actually the opposite, that the key to our success seems to now be that we allow the expertise of the user to inform the use of the product, and we take ourselves out of the picture as much as we possibly can.
So it's a model not of build it and they will come, but build it and they will reinvent it for you.
Well, it's a model of like what we're seeing in the Middle East now, where certainly Mark Zuckerberg did not intend Facebook, I don't think, to be used for promoting political freedom in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And yet there you have it.
So the panel is entitled Secrets of Success, and I believe that actually one of the secrets of success is failure and then graceful recovery from the failure. Had breakfast with a former venture capitalist this morning, and he was saying that any one of the enterprises that might approach him as a venture capitalist could have fantastic technology, and he expected that there were going to be holes in the enterprise, that they might not have the marketing lined up or the management, or the distribution might not be worked out yet, or there could be a blind spot relative to a competitor or the cost line. Basically, places where the enterprise left unsupported could fail. And we didn't talk about it, but if I know the success rates of venture capital investments, if they get 1 out of 10 that's a big hit, that's fantastic, and probably 7 are going to either bounce along the runway or auger in. So failure there is useful. The question I'd ask you is, as you think through the life of your enterprises, are there failures that were particularly shocking on the one hand and instructive and have contributed to your success on the other hand, that really were development opportunities for the enterprise? Ronni?
2 things come to mind in this area, and they're more about less about the implementation of the project and more about the organizational sustainability and structure. So one is that, we're now going into our 8th year in the field, about 10 years of operation, and we poured all of our funding that we received, including any unrestricted funding, into our programs, which nobody regrets because we've developed fantastic programs, and I think that was critical. At the same time, as you continue to expand and work your business model, there have been times when we've had, say, there's a natural ebb and flow where, we have a country office, let's say, in Afghanistan, and they may be scaling up because they have 15 different things and they need 50 people to implement 1 year, kind of like a production house. And then there's less. It's not closing down by any means, but there's a little less the following year. There's a flexible ebb and flow, except for the core people. And what we did in the past, I think, for a couple of years was we kind of stayed with investing in keeping the structure the way it was at its expansion, hoping that we could fill the gap, as opposed to adjusting flexibly so that we then had that money to reinvest in either marketing or business development, because that, and now we've sort of realized how critical that is, to be able not only to have additional money to invest in expansion of marketing and business development so you can go to new places or raise new funds, but also just to be right-sized, and you have to be prepared with flexible models to adjust to changing circumstances, including, you know, sometimes like right now in Cambodia, we're going to actually spin our organization off, so it's a satellite of, you know, because there's more locally derived funds. So I think what happened is we were a little too attached to the structure and didn't see the advantage of a little more flexible moving structure. And I think that gave us some hardship.
Yeah, thank
so
you.
I'll lead with that one.
Great, thanks. Joel?
I mean, it's hard to think where to start when you think of all the mistakes that you've made. But as you say, the trick is that if you're still standing, then, you know, as long as they're not fatal mistakes, then I guess it's okay. I think for me, one of the things that's been most fascinating to me, and it's, you know, I don't know if you'd call it a mistake or simply a readjustment of the way we've thought. I didn't know what social entrepreneurs were. When I left, I used to work for the Centers for Disease Control, and my business partner in Datadyne, Radha, used to work for the American Red Cross. We left those organizations. We both worked in mobile data collection on things like Palm Pilots in international development. We thought we could consult and do what we'd been doing, maybe better with less bureaucracy if we were in an independent organization, so we left. And I think we envisioned ourselves sort of as an NGO-ish kind of a thing. We started as an LLC, because you can do that in Washington, D.C. in a day. You can make one in a day. But we didn't really think so much about business models or any of that kind of stuff at all. And at a certain point, I got a call from Fast Company magazine, who told us that we were being named as a social enterprise of the year. I think this was 2008 or 2009. And literally got off the call, and, you know, Rose heard me thanking somebody on the phone and said, "What was that about?" And I said, "That was about, they said we've won we're social enterprise," or something like that. She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "I don't know." and you know, I mean, this is literally going then to Wikipedia and looking for, you know, going online and Googling social enterprise and realizing, wow, this actually reflects a lot of the disquiet we've had with the kind of the model of us as a technology NGO getting our funding only from grant-making donors. What I'm getting to here is that, you know, we were very lucky initially in the course of Datadyne to be able to get grants from the World Bank, Vodafone Foundation, United Nations Foundation. Fantastic, and we, you know, so appreciate this money without which we wouldn't have been able to start. The problem, I think, becomes that if you are, as we have been doing, creating software for the use of, let's say, health workers in developing countries, but all your funding comes from someone who sits in Geneva or Washington, you get this disconnect. Right? Because generally, you know, frankly, people who sit in Geneva or Washington don't know anything at all about what a health worker in Africa needs. And, you know, equally frankly, when someone calls from X foundation who's funding us and a health worker calls on the other phone, I take the funder's call. Right? Everybody does. You know, I saw something online the other day, which I'm not quite sure exactly how it applies to us, but it was very thought-provoking to me, which said, if you're not the customer, if you're not paying, you're not the customer, you're the product being sold. And I read this weeks ago. I'm still mulling around in my head and trying to think of how it applies to what we do. But one thing that I've noticed is we decided a couple years ago, almost 2 years ago now, to take our free EpiSurveyor product and to have pricing tiers. Why did we do it? Because we needed the money. Right? I thought it was a necessary evil to start charging the better funded of our organizations that were using it. And what I found is it's not actually an evil thing at all. Of course, I'm in Silicon Valley. I think most people in the audience probably already know this. I'm not of Silicon Valley. I thought it was a bad idea that we were forced to do. And what we found instead is that having our users pay us aligns us, no surprise now, with what the users want. Now, I can tell you that the organizations that pay for our software are huge public health organizations, sometimes ministries of health, et cetera, sometimes organizations that are equally large but not in health. Those organizations, they may not know what a health worker in a village in Africa needs either. But they're a much better proxy, right? They are data collectors. They're both users of the software and they are also funders of the software, as opposed to just funders of the software who, I could tell you that none of the organizations that funded us in our early years, I realized later when I began looking through our login records, had ever actually logged into our software. I mean, they were funding us year after year or making decisions to fund us, but it wasn't based on anything about our software. Well, what was it based on? Apparently it was based on our ability to do a good slideshow, right? I mean, honestly, it was based on our ability to tell a story that fit into the story that they were trying to tell. And sometimes that produced good results, and sometimes that didn't produce good results. But what I'm much more content now, knowing that we stand or we fall as an organization based on not are we telling a story that's sort of related to a story that I don't quite understand in some other organization. Right now we stand and fall based on whether we provide excellent software to individual users in organizations that are saving children's lives in Africa and elsewhere. Much better situation. But again, I look at it as a success. The reason I mentioned it under failure is it took us 7 years to figure that out, of making every possible other funding mistake we could make.
Yes. Radha, anything to add on this?
Sure. First of all, I believe bruises and scars build character, and just absolutely critical to our existence, particularly those of us who work in this field. And I think failing, picking yourself up, dusting off, and moving on is a real learning experience. Mine that, first of all, I'd say there's probably learnings and these mistakes, as you call them. I don't even think of them as failures anymore, because if I did, then it would be happening weekly, you know, so it's sort of like, okay, these are learning experiences.
An old boss of mine used to say, there's no problem, there's just an opportunity.
Exactly, right. So one that actually changed a lot of our model, as you were talking, Joe, I was thinking about this, how we went to an earned income model. Interestingly, Anudip was incubated at the GSBI at Santa Clara. So, and my husband was here, and as he started, was the co-founder of Anudip. And Santa Clara talks, the GSBI talks about the earned income model and making yourself, and we're an NGO, and that's what is called a Section 25 or a 501c3 nonprofit organization. As we started to do livelihood, what we call market-aligned skills training for a large number of rural youth and women, and our metrics were not how many people trained, but how many people actually had livelihoods, how much we brought the employers into the districts, because training people and then sending them off into urban areas is another big issue, particularly in India. So reducing urban migration, and how do we actually use IT-enabled skills to do this? The example that's a big learning for us is we worked with an all-Muslim community of 700,000 people, and the women, it's only about 2.5 hours away from Kolkata, which is a major metro, but 95% of the women had never been to Kolkata because they were not allowed to cross this large main road and go to the other side. So we did the skills development, and then we got really nervous and really dejected about how were these people, these women, ever going to find livelihoods, jobs, because the employers wouldn't come into that community, the women couldn't leave. And I will never forget one day, I was sitting there, and we were actually thinking about maybe we have 28 centers, maybe we have to close this center down, we weren't making progress, what do we do? And feeling pretty depressed. And this one young lady, who's 20, looked at me and said, in a very simple way, she says, Didi, which means older sister, why are you worried? Why don't you bring the projects to us? I was like, huh? Really? Well, why not? And so we started doing this, and we actually set up a project, like an outsourcing project center in the middle of this community. And it became three things. It became an earned income model for us. It's one of our most profitable, successful places. It's created jobs for a large number of Muslim women, and it is really serving customers. So our model now has market-aligned skills development and employer placement, micro-entrepreneurship, and IT outsourcing centers. And actually, the outsourcing business is one that's really scaling, and we've set up 4 others of these. And it was such a learning. In fact, I will just end by saying this. One of the projects they do, most of the projects are from all over the world, particularly from the US. One project is called Spot Crime. And Thane actually was there and filmed this because he couldn't believe this. There's all these Muslim women sitting in Métier Bruce. When there is a crime in one of 134 universities in the US, that information, the first FIR, first information record, goes clear across the world to Métier Bruce, to this place where, sadly, the women, most of them, now they have left and gone to see Kolkata because of the work we're doing, but didn't before. And they have a window to the world. It goes there, they record it, they put it on Google Maps, they put all the information on, it gets uploaded at the end of the week. So if your kid is looking for colleges, or you want to find out the crime rate in Yale, and we were at Yale with one of the tech laureates here just 3 weeks ago, and I said to them, let's log on and see in New Haven, in this particular area, what's the crime rate? And guess where this information is coming from? It's coming from Métier Bruce, in clear over in India. And the point I'm trying to make is that learning came from, we were so close and so kind of, not close, but looking at it in a straightforward, Silicon Valley, focus area, focus on this, don't go, focus and win, that kind of stuff. And we're looking at it much more broadly now, and it's going to, this year, going to be about 50% of our expenses are going to be covered through an earned income model.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lisa?
I guess a couple of things come to mind. One is we're pretty cautious about working in a new region at a scale beyond what we think is a good way to start, particularly when we don't have the right actors or advocates in place for the project. So we've had, we've been approached, we do work with districts and state level offices, but we're always really careful about making sure that on a classroom level we have teachers as advocates for the program, and that the district or state is willing to work to scale the program up at a pace that we think is reasonable, because we do have some sort of non-negotiables in terms of the kind of professional development learning paths that we know teachers need to be successful in this kind of work. And then this is just sort of a minor point in terms of our own organizational structure. Early on, the initial pilot between Moscow and New York State, the model was pairing one class with one class. And we found early on that one, that wasn't sustainable, that you might be pairing two teachers whose schedules didn't match, or their curriculum didn't match, or their personalities didn't match. And so even though there was that concept of collaborating on projects together, it was a partnership model. And so we after that first 3 years scaled it up in our it's more project-based now, so that we can ensure that there's always sort of a critical mass of activity in the projects, and so that the teachers entering those projects are entering them because the project makes sense for their local curriculum and makes sense for their own learning objectives in their classroom. So I think that was an important correction for us early on.
Yes. I mean, if I were to think across these, and I think you said it, Radha, it's maintaining flexibility of mind and actually observing what's going on, rather than being attached to the mental construct that you've created for what the enterprise should look like, where the funding should come from, where the work should take place, and being open to what's actually happening in the field. Sounds like maybe the key for error recovery. Each of you has expanded the reach of your enterprise, has done some work scaling up, and I'd really like to ask, how do you go about scaling up? What's your thinking about moving to scale as you've expanded into new countries? I mean, we heard a couple of models that say let it happen in the country and really have the resources particular to that. As you expand into new domains or areas of activity, how do you make the decisions about that? Are you doing market research? Are you using EpiSurveyor as a market research tool, for instance? I mean, it sounds like it's right for that. So just your thoughts on expansion. And somebody just jump in. I'm gonna stop dispatching. We're gonna have a conversation.
I mean, I'll tell you that for us, in technology, it may be maybe a special case. You know, I think we've been very lucky in the last 20 years, those of us who are working in developing countries, at things like, you know, for example, the internet, right? The web, and now the mobile phone. That these things have been laid in our laps and have completely transformed what we can and cannot do. I think that the field of international development, though, has been slow to understand the implications of those changes for a variety of reasons. So in terms of scaling up, EpiSurveyor, which, just to explain briefly, if you're collecting data on paper forms, you know, lists of questions, you can go to this website, enter the forms in, and then beam those forms to mobile phones and collect them. So now there's two components. There's a web-based form creation and design system, and then there's the mobile phone app. Generally, that's correct. So it used to be that the design system was actually locally installed on individual computers. It was a Windows program. And the mobile part was a Palm Pilot program. Now, the obstacles that we had, this would have been, say, in ancient times 5 years ago, you know, when I was carrying a Palm Trio, and I thought that was pretty special. At that time, the obstacles we had to scale were two, a hardware problem and a software problem. The hardware problem was that Palm Pilots, which were designed for business people in the United States and Europe, were not sold generally in Africa, right? So there were no economies of scale, there were no economies of distribution to enable us to do this. And I was thinking literally of how do I get grant money to buy every African health worker this piece of hardware? That is a crazy way of thinking, but I would say it probably dominates decisions within international development right now that have to do with hardware. How can we find money to buy things and give things to people?
Let me just interject that this is exactly an example of what we were just talking about, that you had a model in mind of how are we going to disseminate it, and then another model came clear to you.
Well, again, on the hardware side, what moved me out of this model was observing that everybody I was trying to buy a Palm Pilot for suddenly was walking around with a mobile phone. You know, a Palm Pilot Plus. And so we said, well, obviously we got to switch to the mobile phone. On the software side, the problem was that it was difficult to install our software. I didn't think it was difficult, but it was obviously difficult because people had problems with it. You had to install our software, Java software, Palm software, all this stuff. And if we weren't there, and we're not scalable, right? We, as people, are not scalable. If we weren't there, the process wouldn't go forward many times. And I happened to notice something, and again, this is about maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I noticed that the people who made Hotmail, which is now owned by Microsoft, that Hotmail had managed to give a free email account to every single health worker in sub-Saharan Africa above the village level, not by trainings or capacity building or going out to the country or doing any of the tools, applying any of the tools that we usually used for technology projects in international development. They did it by making it a web application. So when people ask us, you know, well, is EpiSurveyor in Uzbekistan? Like, EpiSurveyor is on the web. It's like Gmail. So for us, as soon as we made that decision, we said, how did Hotmail do it? How did Yahoo Mail do it? And we realized we've got to make this a web application. The minute we made it a web application and we took it out of our control, we made it so we didn't have to actually be there on the ground to implement. And some things you have to do that with. I mean, some kinds of trainings you can't maybe automate at this point. But for our stuff, we could put it on the web. The minute we did that, EpiSurveyor was scaled all over the place. And it just became a question of marketing, essentially, to get people to know that the tool exists. And that's our main problem now. It's not product development, it's letting people know that it exists. But after 2 years online, we've got, 6,000 users in 170 countries. It's, unprecedented. It's a pathetic failure from a Silicon Valley standpoint in terms of scale. But it's the most amazing success in international development technology ever, which again gives you some idea of how far behind we are on the development side.
Well, Ronni, you have a lot of reach, and you reach into different depths. How do you think about that sort of scaling wide and scaling deep?
Well, one of the things is because one of the primary tools is producing radio programs. Right now, we have hubs in that country, but what we do is, and this kind of happens in any country, we form partnerships with community radio stations. So that means in any one country we might have 40 or 50 radio station partners who we provide the content, who we partner to create content together, who we train so that they can do call-in shows to serve their own community on the topics. And it becomes a very reciprocal relationship. But after a while, whether we're producing content or not on some of the issues, they've already learned and are continuing on. But that, we can pretty much reach the entire country with one program. Now, as we've been in any one country, what I like, we work across 5 sectors, as I was saying, basic sectors. Doesn't mean we don't do other things. So in each country, there are, various funders, that have objectives, whether they're in agriculture or human rights. So we have a model where we can create a program about that subject, bring subject matter experts in locally, and it kind of naturally builds this portfolio of what we're dealing with in a country. So we might be doing 7 different programs related to youth, to HIV/AIDS in any one country. And that kind of builds based on demand or based on other people knowing about our program. The other thing is, for instance, that youth program's been running for 7 years. We've replicated it, targeting youth age 15 to 30, which I think, I tell people, if you ask me which of the sectors that we do would I say, would not, give up, if I had to give everything else up and just pick one, it would be that, because it's youth age 15 to 30, which we all know are, in most developing world countries, well over 50% of the population. They're the people most apt to be receptive to new ideas. They're the new parents, they're the voters, they're the most at risk, and many of them don't have jobs. But that program in any one country deals with so many different topics that a funder can come in and say, we want to run something about education on HIV, or in Nepal, it saw the youth through the Maoist revolution and their kids being, their brothers and sisters being kidnapped, to participating in the Constituent Assembly, to how do you date and when can you talk about HIV? And because that's all of what their life is. So then I think that scaling to new countries, we do it 2 ways. I mean, we try not to get too diffused, but if a new country comes into focus, either because we get requested by a funder or because we've identified it, if we're going to go in and hire local people and open an office, we try to have a critical amount of funding to get started. But otherwise, sometimes we just get called on for technical support so that we can come in and do training and teach about our model and have that continue without getting overly dispersed. It's sort of a consulting role as opposed to. So we've pretty much been adding 1 or 2 countries every year successfully with that model.
Yes, great. Radha, what about you? You have pretty ambitious goals for the number of livelihoods that you intend to support the creation of over the next 10 years. Are villages and projects coming to you? Are you reaching out? How do you either filter what's coming to you or identify the next frontier?
So, as you started to say, our objective is to reach 100,000 livelihoods in the next, actually, 6 years. And we're starting at, we're right now at around the 8,000. And when you reach 100,000 livelihoods for individuals, then you have, at least in the Indian context, you've touched about 500,000 people, because it's about a 1 to 5 in each family. And most of these families, the youth that we are, the women that we're developing the skill with and generating the livelihood, is oftentimes the single wage earner, or at least they're going from, there is at least a minimum of 3 times increase in earning power when these people are trained. But we think of 3 things. Every social entrepreneur hears this from funders: replicability, sustainability, scalability. I think everybody sitting here looks at it and goes, oh yeah, I wake up thinking those 3 words. So we decided that we would look at it and say, we would have the 3 words be exciting for us, rather than, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? So we think, how am I going to write it into the report? What am I going to say to the funder, etc. Disruptive technologies, and you would think dealing with rural areas, what are you talking about, disruptive technologies? But with the mobile over there, cloud computing and being able to put applications, curriculum, matching of jobs with employers, we put all the work, like a project, distributed into micro work and sort of on a hub that it's put on a cloud. You think of all of these things, you say, you'd be doing this with people in rural areas? Absolutely, yes. So disruptive technologies, I was telling, we were talking at just before, that we used Ken Banks, the frontline SMS, in a disaster situation where we had a cyclone, super cyclone, and in the last 8 hours, the cyclone veered right onto where people were evacuating. It was going to affect 100,000 more lives than that. So we used frontline SMS, 100,000 broadcasts at one time to actually show people that they had to evacuate, and we did this on an hour every hour, with a large number of partners and the government. And it really, really helped to save lives. So that's a technology, that's a piece of software which we think of. So disruptive technologies. The second one is we partner the heck out. We shamelessly will go to anybody who has a solution, whether it's EpiSurveyor, whether it's what you do, it doesn't matter, whether it's eHealth Points, anybody. And we will scan all the time to see what's out there already. There is none of this not invented here syndrome. Yeah. And working with other NGOs, I must say, the development world, this is at least my experience, people who work in the development world really want to partner to actually increase impact, even though we're fighting maybe for the same funders' dollars, but we really think about impact. And so the partnering, every one of our 28 centers has, in the rural areas, has a community NGO partner that gives us access and trust into the community. That's the second one. The last one, which I know there are lots of funders here, and I love funders dearly, but we are open to, we're not sort of stymied by, we're an NGO and we only take grants. This organization is for-profit, so it's only equity-based. I think this is when John Kohler talks about this horizontal social capital and horizontal capital aggregation, we're probably embodied. We have grants, we have debt financing, we have soft loans, we have equity, and if there's a fifth one that comes across that we all invent together, we're game for that. And our ability to manage these different kinds of capital across the organization and manage them properly and be able to report back to the funders, I really think is helping us to scale. Mm-hmm. So those would be my points. Mm-hmm.
And Lisa, you've got fantastic reach. If you've got 2 million students involved in projects in any given day, are projects coming to you? Are you reaching out for projects? How does that dynamic work in IEARN?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We have very different reactions to our size, and in some ways, to look at it, 40,000 teachers is a huge number, but we work with between 3,000 and 4,000 teachers in the U.S. There are millions of public school teachers in the U.S., so our scale is still small. And so when we think of scale, we think of, echoing what the comments are here of sort of impact and influence. And we think there's huge value to from a teacher perspective, being able to work in such a diverse online space. We run this online collaboration center where all the projects are happening for a classroom teacher to be able to travel the world in this context of other educators who have been locally vetted, who have come in with the same goals and purposes. That's a big deal. But in terms of one of our big goals is to make a meaningful international exchange experience a graduation requirement, that every young person in the U.S. should have that in order to graduate. And to do that, we know that doesn't mean every teacher and student in the U.S. joining IEARN. It means looking at ways that we can join forces with other traditional exchange programming organizations and other groups that are looking at integrating technology. A couple of initiatives we're involved in now. One is called Connect All Schools, and it's an effort to try and have teachers tell the story of what global education looks like in their classroom, so that policymakers and governments can actually see and visualize what this idea. There's been a lot of work recently on sort of defining global competency, but in terms of what a classroom looks like that fosters that, there's been a lot less attention on that and less attention on professional learning paths that allow teachers to create those spaces. And then another is called Exchange 2.0, and it's a campaign in partnership with the State Department, a couple of other organizations, Global Nomads and Solia, different groups that are looking at how you can leverage technology to give every young person an opportunity to connect internationally. We know the statistics on international travel abroad for students is pretty dismal. In the U.S., under 2% of university students have an international exchange experience. So we're really eager to look at how you can leverage technology to make that possible for every student anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. So, go ahead, Ronni.
I had, when you, Radha, when you were talking about disruptive technologies, I just wanted to add in some way another disruptive technology that we're using, if I can use that word, which I find is really contributing to the scale. It's basically, because we're a communications organization, it's actually communicating. Mm-hmm. So it means the reason we're getting so many results is because our whole methodology starts with listening first, giving voice to others, including that every single time, like we don't produce anything in advance, the microphone's in the village hand, and also not just that, but letting people take action or contribute in the way they do. And I've seen it over and over again. Our process is so simple, but all of the country offices, now it's 10, 11 years, people, brand new people, because of that orientation of respect and really coming in with a beginner's mind, not coming in to say we know something, or even at the level of the country, not coming in and saying these people need to know something. It's about listening and dialogue. And because of that, miracles continue to occur because people just need that chance to participate. And so I wanted to include that because a lot of times when we talk about access to information and even technology, we forget either what the content is, but more than that, it's not about the delivery of information, it's about the transmission of empowerment or the invitation to participate. I think it's the most critical thing out of everything.
Yeah.
Can I say one more thing? What you said is so true, because people don't just sit there and realize, oh, we're behind in technology, so we can't do this. Skype's my best friend. Wherever we are, we do staff meetings on Skype. Our rural centers communicate on Skype. They say, oh, the curriculum, we put curriculum on the cloud, and they say, well, there's some mistake with this. They Skype each other. They don't think a second time about, oh my gosh, I'm using this new piece of technology. So it allows people to just do things in ways that they would never, that we wouldn't imagine, 20 rural centers coming together. We do our staff meeting on Skype, and there is not a single person. Two people are never in the same place together. And our staff meetings happen on Skype, and we do this once every 2 weeks. So it's just that openness and not feeling like, oh, this is new, I'm doing something no one else has done. It's sort of almost an automatic feeling of, oh, the technology's there, we darn well use it. And I think using the mobile and Skype and all of these things and cloud is just making such a difference. And more than ourselves, here's one last thing I would say, one observation is, I find that it's actually more innovative in the use of technology in sort of the rural field that we work in than I would think of. My BlackBerry works anywhere that I go to in all of our centers. It does not work in Saratoga, where where we have a home up in the hills. And that I would just kind of end with.
That's a great comment. And what you're saying really is that the disruptive technology of one moment becomes the necessary infrastructure of the next moment.
But I would point out, though, that the technologies you're talking about, like the mobile phone and Skype, these are all commercial technologies. I think, again, within international development, the folks who are working in technology for international development, we are still at the very, very beginning of learning how do we make stuff that is as scalable as Skype. And again, these technologies, the ones that scale, are always ones that do not require a training class, that do not require consultants from this country to go to that country, that do not require you to be a programmer, etc. But those requirements, consultants, programmers, etc., those are basically descriptors for 99.9% of technology projects in international development. So while we found these technologies that have transformed our personal lives, I mean, everybody who works in international development uses Skype. Everybody uses a mobile phone. Everybody uses Facebook. Everybody uses all these things. But when we build technologies, almost without exception, we like to think we're an exception, but almost without exception, we don't actually use that same approach. I think that points to not just these kind of general aspects of the technology, but the business models also that are used, and this gets to the enterprise part, the business models that are used. Most organizations that work in technology for international development, they are paid to put boots on the ground. They're paid by the number of trainers. They're paid by the number of consultants. And so the goal of those organizations, it's very sustainable, right? There's lots of profit in it. The goal of those organizations is to maximize the boots on the ground. Of course, Skype isn't paid by the boots on the ground, and Apple's not paid for the iPhone by boots on the ground, nor is Google. Those companies are paid to scale. I think we really need to talk, and I'm sure it's beyond the scope of this one discussion, we need to talk about how can we get those business models that pay organizations to scale, how can we put that into place within international development? Because I think once you start paying organizations to scale, they will start scaling.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's there already in some ways, and I do understand exactly what you're saying, but for us, the advent of the mobile phone, we started primarily with radio because we wanted to reach the people that weren't being reached, and we could see that the internet in its current form with the power requirements was not getting there fast enough, but the mobile phone is. Everyone in Afghanistan has a mobile phone, and not only that, but they're soon going to have a baby smartphone, and in all these places. So, and the profit model is there already because the mobile suppliers are. So what's happening is, for instance, the radio stations are using SMS as a way of raising revenue because they're pushing information out and sponsoring things, and local businesses are advertising with them. So one of the things that I think is interesting is looking at what could be, those mobile applications, because it's already scaling for, even if in very poor families, I'm not saying every single person, but they may have one. And because it's happening so quickly, I mean, the radio's going on the mobile phone, there'll be text or pictures. So, I mean, I think that's very exciting because I see the developed world is going mobile, and the more and more will be applicable. I'm not saying they'll have all the apps of an iPhone, but they have a lot. They can get crop prices. There's just more and more. I mean, I saw a phone that was. So I guess what I was saying is that that's at scale. I mean, we have 20 million regular listeners. We're getting 5,000 SMSs a month on each program, which is talking about. It's not just one thing. I'm not saying it's perfect, but so they're giving us information. We're pushing information out about resources. So that part is exciting because it's already there. But I think we're saying the same thing because it's leveraging. To me, I think leveraging the things that can get that have the opportunity to reach people sooner. It's almost a pull. It's not a push anymore.
So I think that the mobile phone. I mean, the mobile phone has enabled lots of things. I guess my point is that people working in technology and international development have a tendency, for example, to look at the mobile phone. And I mean, let's keep in mind how unprecedented the success of the mobile phone is in scaling to poor people in villages, right, and sustaining itself. You've got to go back to radio, 100 years ago, to find another information communication technology that scaled and sustained that way.
Maybe cassette players.
I don't know anyone in an African village who's got a cassette player.
Right.
I've never even seen one there.
Not
right?
anymore.
But everyone, every household in an African village has this. So you got mobile phones, radios, and before that, I don't know, smoke signals. You've got to go back to, you know, what are the other successes? We're talking about a once-in-a-century success.
I agree.
But in international development, in the technology side, we have a tendency to look at the success of the commercial, we are selling mobile phones, proprietary system that has achieved this miracle, and you could say equally the same thing about radio, and we say, wow, this is an amazing success of selling these devices to the poorest people on earth in a profitable model with proprietary software and hardware, etc. We need to emulate this, and the way we're going to do this is by creating open source systems that we'll give away.
Right.
And it's like, well, guys, that only works if you think that the success of the mobile phone industry, that the fact that they're charging for something, that they're selling something, is somehow incidental to their success. But of course, we're in Silicon Valley, we understand that it is not incidental, it is central to their success.
Right.
It's this kind of learning the wrong lesson, I think, that I deal with all the time on the East Coast, and I think is far less prevalent on that kind of thinking on the West Coast.
You know, one thing that Thane mentioned early on, we have this sort of a program institute between the Center of Science, Technology, and Society and the School of Engineering called Frugal Innovation. And Frugal Innovation is about the types of innovations, development of products, technologies, whatever it might be, and it's not just software. It could be something to do with clean water. It could be reversible fuel cells, whatever. And really being able to innovate it and scale it to the point with the right business models. So it does become a scaled business. And there's a fair amount of work we're doing in this, and that the School of Engineering and the Center are doing. And as you were talking, I was thinking, I mean, EpiSurvey could very well be one that we can actually look at scaling to, if you take it out of just the health and take it broadly across, it could scale for data collection across pretty much any type of project we're doing out there. All of the NGOs could use that. All of the social enterprises can use that. And we're even thinking about, we're working on something like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, we haven't found a title for it, like an app store. We're actually looking at all of these applications that are available that can actually scale across multiple benefit areas and make them available, because NGOs and social benefit organizations touch millions of people. I mean, look at their BHAG here is 1 billion people. Like, you guys touch a few 100 million people. So if we made them available, then you could actually scale. And I don't mean make them available just as free, you know, open source, but make them available so that you actually, there is a value to it and you pay for it. And bringing things like that together and making it into a store and making it available can really expand the reach of a lot of the technologies you're talking about from the development environment.
Right. So let me, I'm going to shift to another topic, and you're actually hinting at it right here. We're talking about scale. But before I do, I'd just like to review the bidding here on the conversation about how you scale up. And what I think I've heard is, first thing is, if there is a widespread existing infrastructure, mobile phones, radio, increasingly Skype and the internet, use it and use it widely. Partner like crazy. No, not invented here. Back on technology, think about disruptive technologies and how they might be able to transform your approach and your approach internally with your organization and the approach to scaling to those that you're serving. Be open to diverse funding streams and as many as necessary, as many as possible. We'll be talking more about that in the afternoon panel. Take on a consulting role. If you've got something that's successful that there's a desire to replicate, don't feel you've got to replicate it yourself, but rather consult for its replication. Communication, really listen, really give voice to those whom you serve, those with whom you partner, And then I think the last one here, which is brilliant, is emulate the business models of those who have become the infrastructure, and see, you know, think big, think giant. Could this be? Could we charge for this for everybody on the planet, regardless of income? This gets to a question, though, of reach, scale, scope, and impact. Increasingly, to the extent that you're receiving funding from impact investors, they are more and more interested in metrics and measurement of the impacts of what you're actually doing. And presumably you're spending, if you've been in existence for a while and moved from the fairly freewheeling grant world that was, you know, put your boots on the ground, and we're counting the boots you put on the ground, to actually measuring what those boots on the ground are accomplishing. Presumably you're devoting more resources to that kind of measurement than you were before. And so my question really is how do you assess the impact of your programs? And particularly, as I'm hearing here, you know, reach of 100 million, reach of 20 million, livelihoods of 8,000, there are multiple orders of magnitude between these, and it seems to me that there is also, if I were measuring depth of intervention, there probably, if I had a measure of depth, probably orders of magnitude different in depth as well. And so how do you think about this reach versus depth in your impact assessment?
I can start if you like. I think first of all, there's a lot of different things to measure, and different people are interested in measuring different things. So if there are some, if you would say donors or investors, if you will, that they want to know about the reach. How many people are, including even in our industry, what's your broadcast audience reach? How many people are listening? Not to, and listening once a week. And for some people, that's what they want to know, because they assume if they're tuning in every week, they're getting something from it. But that's really just the surface. But it's significant, because if only 10 people are listening versus 20 million, there's a difference. And of course, Madison Avenue and even the internet goes by how many eyeballs looked. So they're not necessarily measuring what happens with the eyeballs. And so that's one kind of broadcast audience survey. And that, the other is more what you're talking about, the impact. So, but that's more per project. So if we're working on a project to support the end of violence against women in Nepal, and we have a certain target demographic, we'll do what's called a knowledge, attitude, and behavior impact assessment, which is both quantitative and qualitative, where we interview a sample size at the beginning of what people are thinking about the issue, what are the obstacles, both in what they know and in how they think about things, and what behavior, and then maybe measure it midterm and end term. To see whether percentage-wise people are taking different actions or have different thoughts, and that's a social measurement of behavior change.
And how are you doing that measurement?
We do it. I mean, there's two ways you can do it. You can do it through focus groups, where you go into detail about what made a woman trust this various thing. That's qualitative, and you get a very depth analysis of what's in the way. Quantitative is a real survey, like a 1,000 respondent survey in sample villages, asking multiple questions, and then coming back midterm and end term and asking those questions, and having a statistical analysis that for instance, the men on that violence against women program were 35, we doubled the amount of men that were actually taking action to prevent violence against women in their village based on the program. But that's quantitative.
Could that be a text-based survey? Ronni meet Joel, Joel Ronni?
Well, I mean, I think it's usually interview-based, because of course someone's going out and asking and assessing. Yeah. But the survey instrument is designed in advance. I mean, based. Text would be, I mean, you could do certain things on polling. It just depends. it's a little, you know, for something like that, behavior change, I think that the interview is important, you know, how you set that up, because anyone can just, you've got to be able to tell what they're saying and ask it 3 different
FCCR
ways.
is not primarily text-based, by the way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that tends to be, you know, in a way per project, you know, that kind of
Yes.
impact, as opposed to organizational metrics, which are more about how many people have we trained, how many people are we reaching. The other is more what happened because of what's, and when I say what happened, there's outputs, which means we trained so many people, but what we're talking about is so many people got a job, or so many people didn't do X, Y, Z, or so many people now have moved to a different way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody care to add on impact measurement? Lisa?
I can add as well. IEARN, after the first 3 years, that's been the last sort of network-wide evaluation of the program. It's sort of echoing what Ronni said. A lot of the evaluations that we have done now and that we benefit a huge deal from are either national level or district or state level or project specific. And that teaches us a lot in terms of what objectives people had in joining IEARN. It was the case in Chicago that they were bringing schools in as part of a literacy grant. And what they thought and improved is that when students were involved in authentic writing tasks, that their literacy rates would improve. Or in the state of Delaware, they were building a cohort model for supporting teachers to integrate global issues into their classroom. And so that taught us a lot about building a professional development model that was, you know, hybrid face-to-face and online courses and local support. But I would say that's what, for us, it tends to be that we team up with, or the Ministry of Education in Egypt. Their interest was not so much in the international aspect of what we were doing, but in the student-centered learning model, and that was something they were putting a lot of emphasis on, and so that's what they were measuring. So we take those lessons, and that helped us also in terms of our approaches to different funders, because it tells us what our users are interested in and why they're participating. And then the other, in terms of sort of tracking numbers, because we do have this online platform that we're able to track and watch, and we try and be pretty disciplined about seeing rates of activity in different projects or regions where teachers are registering students and getting students directly involved versus regions where maybe the teachers are serving more as the mediators for the communication, and that's just constantly helping us to sort of evolve our model of how students and teachers are collaborating, or what interests they have. Their projects dealing with everything from stereotyping and racism to environmental projects, deforestation, water monitoring. And so as we watch the activity, it helps us understand what sort of outside support would benefit what we know already have critical mass sort of activities around particular themes or topics.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to think of it as sort of 3 buckets of metrics, very interrelated and connected. Financial metrics, which are to do with earned income models, or, you know, what's your grant and what do you need, and unit costs, which you hear a lot about from investors. And the second one are program metrics. How many people have we trained, which is okay, but how many have new livelihoods? How many have been placed? What is the difference in earning power in individually in the family? What is their retention rate after a year? You know, those kinds of things, which are very programmatic. And both of these, the financial ones at the organizational level, you know, we put together and measure. The program ones, we do a lot of it through surveys, which are mobile phone kind of surveys, which are the easiest. You send something to them, you never hear back. Even if you call, sometimes you don't get. But then you text something to them, and then you we sometimes get 70% response, which is great. The third piece, which, as we are all social enterprises, I think, which is a very critical piece and hard to quantify, is that metric around a woman saying, I have a voice. It is a thing that we all live and work for. It's that emotional moment very hard, it's anecdotal, very hard to quantify, very hard to actually share that to a funder, to put it on a sheet of paper. But at the end of it, that metric is just as important. And our ability to be able to capture that and the ability to be able to even understand ourselves, what is the transformational change, I think is an area, at least I know we, and there may be other people who know, are doing it better. We're still very much in the early stages of doing that. And I would say one other thing, we get, as we all do, get a lot of requests from investors and funders about metrics, and there are irises and burrs and all kinds of things. At the end of it, we've found we can look at all of that, but the best kind of metrics are the ones that are most useful for the organization. If you're doing the metric just to be able to prove it to somebody else, oftentimes it's not sustainable, and you kind of do it a half-hearted way. But if it's really critical to the scaling and to the growth and to the functioning and to the people that you're working with, then it's long-term sustaining.
I think what we found is that, I think there's certain things that, I'm an epidemiologist by training, someone who studies human disease. I'm a data geek. That's why I've gotten into the business that I'm in. I love data. At the same time, I always balked over the early years of EpiSurveyor when people would ask us, well, do you have any data that indicates whether collecting data electronically is better than collecting it on paper? Right, everybody laughs, right? But this is something that I've had straight-faced funders ask me for, almost a decade now. Is it better? And, back then, because I was getting my money from them, I'd have to answer them with a straight face also. And I'd have to say, well, I didn't see any studies that said that a pocket calculator was better than paper and a scratch pad, or a pen and a scratch pad. I haven't seen, studies that show that having a mobile phone is better than not having a mobile phone. I don't know whether those studies are necessary, but I don't want to do those studies because frankly, I think those answers are obvious. I think these are certain things that we know either because it's just obvious that having better data, is all else being equal, is a better thing. It's obvious, it's part of our core values, that educating someone more, that moving someone from illiterate to literate is a good thing. I don't need to see an evaluation of whether or not that's a good thing to decide whether I should move forward. Love to see more detailed stuff about exactly how it impacts people, but I don't want to have to do that evaluation. I don't think Henry Ford was doing evaluations of the impact of the car. He was too busy getting the car into everybody's hands. And, not that I think what we're doing is the same thing, but in the same way, we're interested in getting the product out there. I talked to the head of monitoring and evaluation for UNAIDS, the United Nations AIDS Agency, who confirmed to me something that I had suspected for a long time. So we have spent, the United States government, the Gates Foundation, the Swedish, the British, we've spent maybe $2 to $3 to $4 billion a year on HIV/AIDS in Africa for the last 7 or 8 years, right? Billions of dollars a year on one disease in one region. And this head of monitoring and evaluation confirmed to me that after doing that for 7 or 8 years, we do not know if HIV/AIDS in Africa is going up or going down. We don't know if the prevalence is increasing or decreasing. The reason I love this example is because in other examples of public health where we almost never know anything, right? We don't know how many kids there are in Vietnam. We don't know how many women are HIV positive in Botswana. We don't know the answers to any of these questions, which may be linked to the fact that we're collecting the data on paper. Right? We're not collecting the data with modern methods of doing so. The reason I love the example of HIV/AIDS is because it's clearly not an issue of money. Right. Right, in that example, we got plenty of money. So, would it be better for us in the HIV? Would it be better if they weren't collecting the data on paper? I'm going to let somebody else answer the question. I know that we have eager customers who sense that it is better for them to collect data faster and more efficiently, and we get our funding from the users now, so that's what we focus on.
Yeah. As my geometry teacher would have said on one of the simple proofs, by inspection. So we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to ask you one last question, which is if you were going to be giving a piece of advice to an aspiring social entrepreneur, and in fact, I think you may be giving pieces of advice to aspiring social entrepreneurs right here in this room, briefly, what would that be? Lisa, let me start with you.
I guess in terms of the audience that we work with, don't underestimate the potential of unleashing youth energy on real-world challenges. Kids, when they are engaged in issues they care about, they'll amaze you and they'll work harder than you could ever imagine.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ronni?
I think be sure if you're starting a venture that you really feel passionate about it. If you want to launch it and take it all the way through, it should be something that you can really give your all to, and it should feed you as well as you feeding it, and be prepared to learn along the way. And I think this aspect that I call navigation, you can have your plans, but you should always be listening and adjusting and fine-tuning for what happens next. Leave room for that magic, because that's actually going to take you where you need to go.
Yeah. Joel?
I'm actually looking up a quote that's going to answer your question.
Okay, perfect.
So
Radha?
give me a moment.
Guess I would ask the question, who the heck am I to give the advice to these great set of tech laureates who are here? I'm learning from each of them, so I spend time with them. The passion is, I think for me, the passion and that sort of almost a maniacal focus on what I call customers, who are the people that we work for, often also known as beneficiaries, but to me they're customers, and that maniacal focus on bringing value to them and the passion about it, which each of them has, is the greatest thing that can make things happen. It can change, I totally believe, it can change all kinds of things. It has changed. And so that's, I don't know if that's advice, but that's just an observation.
Well, I think you just gave a piece of advice by example rather than in your speech, which is listen. Thank you.
So aside from watching Steve Jobs' commencement speech at Stanford, which I think is excellent advice for any entrepreneur, there's a quote that I always loved from Marie Curie, who, as everybody knows, Marie Curie was a famous scientist. She happened to be the only person who ever won 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 completely different fields, in physics and chemistry. She's still the only person who's ever done that. She said, life is not easy for any of us, but what of that? We must have perseverance and, above all, confidence in ourselves. We must believe that we are gifted for something and that this thing must be attained. I mean, that to me describes a lot of entrepreneurs that I know. They don't listen to naysayers. They don't listen to people who tell them they can't do something. They believe that it can be done, and they will keep trying until something physically prevents them from trying. And I think that those of you who have that kind of thought in your heart, that you can do something and it must be done, that you should listen to that.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll count this panel a success in that it ended with chills up my back, and that's always a good sign. Thank you. Before I ask you to thank the panelists, I'm going to ask you to take a break for the next, well, I could tell you the truth about the time, or I could lie about the time. I think I'll lie about it. For the next 20 minutes. That said, we'll be reconvening and starting the session at 11:45 sharp. So please be back in your seats and ready to go a couple of minutes before that. And before I send you to the break, let me ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful job.
Thank you.